I'm Alan Spears with Occupy Democrats, and it's Friday, folks, so what do you say we celebrate by diving into a bit of a bizarre story with none other than Dr. Phil? Now, in a clip I'll be showing you momentarily, Abby Phillips, a correspondent with CNN, decided to interview one of their experts, Dr. Phil. And yes, calling Dr. Phil an expert in pretty much anything is just as confusing and nonsensical as you think. Now, I'm not entirely sure why they decided to use Dr. Phil, of all people, to interview and get his opinion and thoughts and expertise on Donald Trump's court cases and the controversies surrounding them. Now, if you're somehow unfamiliar with who Dr. Phil is, I'm guessing you're under 20 years old. But Dr. Phil was a TV personality that was very big in the 90s and 2000s and technically is still on today, I believe. But he brings on individuals who are facing various problems or woes, be them physical or mental health, family issues, all manner of different troubles. They then take those guests, those individuals on the show, have them talk with either friends, family, or Dr. Phil himself, and try to work through their issues, but with a very high drama reality TV show feel to it. It's very much in the same vein as Jerry Springer, and if you don't know who Jerry Springer is, you're way better off than I am. Now, in his slight defense, Dr. Phil, or Phil McGraw, his real name, he does hold a PhD in clinical psychology and is actually a pretty well-educated individual, though you might not know it from the way he acts and speaks on television. But again, despite having this PhD and despite having a pretty wide wealth of knowledge in the world, at least of psychology, that doesn't necessarily translate to expertise in the political world. All of that said, Dr. Phil isn't exactly known for someone being credible or an expert in anything, more as a celebrity or an entertainer. That is to say, he's about as qualified to talk about politics as your average Joe. Now, I want you to take a look at this clip and see for yourself, but I can't help but notice that Dr. Phil has this deer in the headlights sort of look pretty much the entire interview, and I get the sense that he's in a little bit over his head. It would seem that unfortunately Dr. Phil may be jumping on the Donald Trump grifter bandwagon, but take a look and see for yourself what Abby Phillip had to say, and as she kind of pushed back against Dr. Phil and his, let's call them less than educated opinions.
Are you referring to there?
Michael
Cohen. I mean, well,
yeah.
Dr. Phil, I don't want to get too deep into the law here, but it is not uncommon at all for people who are accomplices to crimes, people who have taken plea deals, non-prosecute. That is not uncommon at all for those people to then testify in subsequent trials for their alleged co-conspirators. That's kind of how a lot of these prosecutions work.
Well, really, give me examples of where that has been considered appropriate.
I mean, look, prosecutors are prosecuting organized crime all the time, and in a lot of those cases, they are relying on co-conspirators to put people who are at the higher levels of the organization behind bars. I don't understand how you can say that because someone signed was not prosecuted, signed a non-prosecution agreement, that information or their testimony cannot be presented before the jury if they were a part of the alleged scheme.
Well, you'll have to give me an example to respond to, because I just simply don't agree with that. I think it's not typical for juries to do this. I've spent most of my career
It happens in mob cases all the time.
Bold of Dr. Phil to say that he's been in this for most of his life, as I thought most of his career had been spent producing shitty reality television. And before we get too deep into this, I just gotta say, I think it's really weird that CNN is interviewing Dr. Phil for anything. Is he really an advisor or a correspondent or consultant or whatever? I mean, I know CNN is free to interview whoever they want, but really, Dr. Phil and for this? It's very strange. But setting aside the fact that Dr. Phil is hardly qualified to talk about pretty much anything other than shitty reality television, Abby Phillip was absolutely correct. I thought it was actually pretty well known that informants or co-conspirators or anyone kind of involved in the crimes who decides to become an informant voluntarily or is kind of drawn in can have their sentences either reduced, if not outright voided. And like Philip mentioned, this is especially true for mob cases, for large criminal organizations where it requires an informant or someone on the inside to help take these groups down. The FBI uses this tactic constantly. I mean, the FBI, the police, pretty much any authority utilizes this tactic of having an informant, having someone on the inside that they're able to turn and use for their own means to bring down the criminal organization. We have a ton of television shows that cover this very sort of thing, these people on the inside, and while of course those are fictional and those don't depict how justice is really served, those processes are real and they're based on elements of truth and reality. And again, like Philip mentioned, this is absolutely a tactic that was utilized to help bring down the mob in the United States. To name just a few, Salvatore Gravano, better known as Sammy the Bull, actually testified in 1991 to help bring down the Gambino family. For a more recent example, there is Andrew Fastow, the former CFO of Enron. He actually managed to strike a deal with a reduced sentence in exchange for bringing down pretty much the rest of the other executives for Enron. And these are just a couple of well-known cases of informants and people who have helped testify and bring down other larger crime groups in exchange for a reduced sentence or immunity. And again, I really just don't understand why Dr. Phil is here in the first place. He's not an expert in the matter. I don't understand why he's being consulted or why his opinion is worth anything, especially considering he's interviewing on CNN. And I'm glad Philip pushed back and used the fact that the mob is a very well-known instance of the FBI and other authorities using informants to help bring down the whole system. I'm just going to say too, have you ever noticed that the celebrities or these high-profile individuals that end up speaking out in favor of Donald Trump or kind of lending their support in some way, they're never reputable. Dr. Phil isn't exactly known for his professionalism or his outstanding character. He's a guy that hosts a reality television show at 1 p.m. that your grandparents watch. But of course, he's hardly the only one that's come out in support of this Trump grift. You have people like the MyPillow CEO. Like, who are these people that come out in support for Trump? They're never like these scholars or these well-educated individuals. They're always grifters. They're always these con men or these entertainers that are looking to make a quick buck. It's so bizarre and confusing, but really it makes perfect sense. Dr. Phil and Trump were responsible for some of the shittiest television the world has ever seen and are grifters, so really it doesn't surprise me that these two are in bed together.